ISI 2012, question number 12, a less than b less than c less than d, then the equation x minus a into x minus b plus twice x minus c into x minus d equals to 0. Okay, so you have a quadratic with roots a and b plus a quadratic with roots c and d. Okay, so let me call this as so you have a less than b less than c less than d, and the function is x minus a into x minus b plus twice x minus c into x minus d. Okay, so let me call this thing as quadratic 1 and this thing as quadratic 2. Use a different color. This thing as quadratic 2. So in my on my x-axis, my quadratic 1 will look like this, roots a and b, and my quadratic 2 will look like this, roots c and d. Okay, quadratic 2 has a 2 multiplied to it, so its amplitude will be twice of that. तो जितना नीचे जा रहा है वो भी twice हो जाएगा, जितना ऊपर जा रहा होगा for the same change in x वो भी twice हो जाएगा. Okay, so it will be like it's been ब्लू कर्व जो था वो पहले रेड कर्व जैसा ही दिखता था, बट बिकॉज ऑफ दिस 2 इट्स गोइंग टू एक्सपांड ट्वाइस इट्स लेंथ. सो इट्स लाइक एक रबर से तुमने वाई एक्सिस को एक्सपांड कर दिया, रबर की तरह ट्वाइस लेंथ का कर दिया. सो दैट्स व्हाट इट विल लुक लाइक. सो नाउ दिस इज माय कर्व. नाउ आई हैव टू ऐड बोथ दीज कर्व्स. सो what will happen to the combined curve? So the combined curve will be also a quadratic. Now where will the roots be? So none of the things talk about कि roots है या नहीं. They all assume कि roots exist कर रहे हैं. So let's go with this assumption कि roots exist कर रहे हैं. So let's divide this into multiple parts. Okay, in part 1 both my curves are positive, so यहाँ तो roots हो नहीं सकते. ठीक है, it's both the curves are positive in this region. In this region curve the red curve is negative, the blue curve is positive. ओके, कि ब्लू कर्व अगर यहाँ पे मैं देखूँ तो यहाँ पे ऐसे एक्सपांड होता रहेगा, तो यहाँ पे ब्लू कर्व की वैल्यू पॉजिटिव है, रेड कर्व की नेगेटिव है. हियर अगेन बोथ आर पॉजिटिव. हियर रेड कर्व इज पॉजिटिव, ब्लू कर्व इज नेगेटिव. हियर अगेन बोथ आर पॉजिटिव. सो रीड्स या तो इस रीजन में हो सकते हैं या फिर इस रीजन में हो सकते हैं. ओके, सो नाउ वेयर इज द रूट मोर लाइकली टू बी? One root in the interval to be. अगर दोनों रूट्स इधर आ गए, if both roots are here, then there should be a stationary point here itself. ठीक है, ओके. तो कंबाइंड कर्व जो होगा, सो आई एम सेइंग द कंबाइंड कर्व, अगर उसके दोनों रूट्स यहाँ है, okay, let's take this situation when the joint curve has one root here and one root here. So the joint curve will look something like this. So the joint curve, which is also a quadratic, if it looks something like this, इस रीजन में भी उसकी वैल्यू नेगेटिव होनी चाहिए. सो दिस sort of a situation negates the idea that in the middle you should have a positive value for the entire curve, because if both the individual curves are taking, both quadratics q1 and q2 are taking positive value, the total quadratic q, which is q1 plus q2, should also be positive. But if I take one root in this region and one root in this region, then in the intermediate section between b and c, the combined quadratic should actually be negative. तो वो हो नहीं सकता. So this situation cannot happen. So I can reject one root in
सर
AB
कोई
and other
ऑप्शन,
in CD. So ये दोनों मैं reject कर सकता हूँ. So either you will have A or you will have B. So either you will have both roots in the left region or both roots in the right region. So let's look at those options. So
सर
अगर
कोई ऑप्शन मैच नहीं कर रहा था इसमें,
हाँ
कोई ऑप्शन आ नहीं रहा था इसमें. सर हम वैल्यू देख सकते हैं ना सर, एफ ऑफ ए पे फंक्शन की वैल्यू अगर नेगेटिव से मतलब ए और बी के बीच अगर ए से पहले फंक्शन पॉजिटिव हो और एक के बाद सर वैल्यू चेंज हो जाती हो तो एक रूट मिल जाएगा, लेकिन दोनों टाइम सर पॉजिटिव ही आ रही है.
नहीं एक्चुअली इसके
सर ए और बी के बीच देखते हैं ना सर, ए से पहले अगर
हाँ
नेगेटिव से
देखो ना
पॉजिटिव हो रहा है
सो ओके
फंक्शन
ओके
की
ओके
वैल्यू.
देखो ए और बी के बीच में ये दोनों वैल्यू पॉइंट्स मैंने ले लिए ठीक है. लेट्स से दीज आर 2 पॉइंट्स बिटवीन ए एंड बी जहाँ पे फंक्शन की वैल्यूज सॉरी द फंक्शन वैल्यूज ये दोनों इसके रूट्स हैं. सो इन इसके बीच में द फंक्शनल वैल्यूज इज नेगेटिव, बाकी हर जगह पॉजिटिव होना चाहिए. दैट इज द क्लेम. बट the functional value here, the midpoint of these two things and the midpoint of these two things, इन दोनों को मैं कंपेयर करूँ तो मैं बोल रहा हूँ यहाँ पे फंक्शनल वैल्यू नेगेटिव है बट यहाँ पे फंक्शनल वैल्यू नेगेटिव नहीं है. नहीं है एक्चुअली विल नॉट वर्क. ए या बी में से कुछ होना चाहिए. माई गट फीलिंग इज कि आंसर शुड बी बी, बोथ रूट्स इन सी एंड डी. I do not know why. Why is my gut feeling like that? वैल्यूज लेके ट्राई करना एक बार इसकी. टेक सम वैल्यूज एंड ट्राई इट.
सर सी अगर एक्स वैल्यू सी से ज़्यादा तो सर नेगेटिव
आई
आ
कांट
रही है
हियर यू
वैल्यू.
क्लियरली.
हेलो. अच्छा,
हाँ
अगर एक्स से सी से ज़्यादा
आई
वैल्यू.
स्टिल कांट हियर यू क्लियरली.
सर डेरिवेटिव या डबल डेरिवेटिव लेके ट्राई करें तो मतलब मैंने करा था, बहुत लंबी इक्वेशन बन रही थी एबीसी.
डेरिवेटिव लेके लग नहीं रहा होना होगा.
सर सी के बाद
ट्यूशन
वैल्यू
नहीं
जो है
था
वो,
अच्छे से उसका.
सर सी के बाद जो वैल्यू है सर वो लगेगा सी से पहले
कांट
पॉजिटिव
एबल टू
टाइम.
हियर यू. Anyway, I have a seminar at 4, so I need to sign off now. इसके आगे की प्रॉब्लम्स और इंक्लूडिंग दिस प्रॉब्लम इसके बाद में मैं सीखता हूँ. एंड लेट्स टेक इट अप ऑन फ्राइडे. ठीक है, लेट्स टेक द नेक्स्ट पार्ट ऑन फ्राइडे. लगभग एक और सेशन हमको लगेगा. जितने सवाल बचे हैं उसमें एक और सेशन लगेगा. ऑलराइट.
So could you upload the videos today?
आई विल अपलोड द वीडियो.
Thank you.
ओके थैंक यू बाय.
सर मेगा पे अपलोड करोगे?
आई एम थिंकिंग आई विल अपलोड इट टू यूट्यूब. एक प्लेलिस्ट बना दूंगा और देन आई शेयर इट. मेगा मैं चालू नहीं कर रहा हूँ क्योंकि चालू करते ही बहुत सारा डेटा यूज हो जाएगा. आई साइन ऑफ नाउ.
We will go for about an hour and then as much time as questions take after that. All right. So yes, carry on.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me for this presentation. The title of my thesis is Essays on Behavioral Industrial Organization and Welfare. I'll save all the acknowledgements for later, but I would like to thank my advisor, Professor Prabal Roy Chaudhary, for his encouragement and guidance throughout this journey. And so I will present firstly a brief overview of all the three chapters, and then I will go into a little bit detail of each chapters. The chapter 1 and chapter 3 are from industrial organization background setup, and then chapter 2 is an experimental paper which looks into literature of bargaining and fairness. So let us go to chapter 1. The chapter 1 is titled Monopoly and the Other, a model of reference dependence. And so we see a vertically differentiated market over here. So there are two firms, and one of them produces high quality product. The second one produces a low quality product. So we see if that consumers are often reference dependent, so they tend to compare the products that that are available. So we ask a simple question: if firms can benefit from accounting such preferences of the consumers, that when they compare the product, they experience a kind of loss and they don't consume the better product out there. The monopolies cannot benefit through this channel of the consumer behavior because there's no other firms for consumer to make comparison with and feel the sense of loss. The next chapter is fairness is flexible. We all know that the idea of fairness is very important because in the set of the fairness helps us to choose the allocation rule if we have a set of Pareto efficient allocations. So it's a nature's way of choosing allocation or distribution of the products. So, but we also know that fairness is quite subjective. What is fair according to me need not be fair according to the other person. So, this multiplicity of fairness ideals is what motivates this paper. So, we want to know if we have this multiplicity of fairness present, then what idea actually prevails in the reality. So we look this question in a particular setup of unstructured bargaining, and we look at three classes of fairness rules, and we make our subjects to bargain pairwise, and then we see that what we find is that the pie size itself suggests which notion of fairness will prevail in the reality. And then the third chapter is happiness infinite. So in this chapter, we examine the traditional idea of established in economics that competition maximizes welfare. So large number of competitive firms means too many choices for consumers. With too many choices, there's also an inherent assumption that cognitive ability to process these choices are infinite. And the traditional economics says that if we have more choices, the welfare will be higher. But in reality, that is not the case, that we have infinite cognitive ability to process all the information, as pointed out by Mulainadan and Shafir in their book Scarcity. So if we have such cognitive costs present, then we try to see is competition maximizes welfare or not. And what we find is that welfare maximizing market structure is indeed strictly oligopolistic and not competitive. So let us go into detail of the first chapter. As I have summed up my 3 chapters briefly, that's what I have mostly done. So firstly, let's define who our consumers are in this structure. So our consumers are the real consumers, real world consumer. They are not homo economicus. They tend to compare all the products option that they have, and they take the best product as the reference point. And if they don't consume the best product, they get a sense of loss, or it takes away from their utility. So the question we ask is that can firms benefit from accounting for this behavior of consumers in their pricing strategy? And the answer is yes, they can benefit from such behavior of consumers if the market is sufficiently vertically differentiated. That is, there is sufficient quality differential between the two products that the firms offer, and the consumer experience utility loss due to comparison. Then the firms can actually choose prices that such that they earn higher oligopoly profits. So next we ask, how much higher can they earn if they are earning higher profits? Then the answer is that some of the firms can actually earn the monopoly level profits despite being in an oligopoly or duopoly. So the intuition is very simple over here, as that when the consumer faces utility loss due to comparison, this secures a high demand for the high quality firm, which helps the high quality firm to raise its prices without the loss in demand, much loss in demand. So this kind of leads to polarization of the market. So there is a secure demand for the low quality firm as well, and which helps the low quality firm to raise its prices further. And as we will see that prices are strategic complements in this setup in a while. So we also ask question that if monopolists can benefit through this channel. As I told you earlier as well, no, they cannot, because there's no other product for consumers to compare with. So consumer is faced with just one choice of buying or not buying in the case of monopoly. So what we find is that oligopolistic structure where monopoly level profits can be sustained is duopoly. So duopoly is the unique oligopolistic structure. So our work is closely related to the paper by Zhao in 2011. The similarities are both papers analyzes duopoly. They analyze in horizontally product differentiated markets, and we analyze in a vertically differentiated setup. And the source of prominence in their case is advertising, which is manipulable by the firms, and in our case it is sort of expert ranking, because in vertically differentiated markets every consumer agrees which product is best and which product is not. So the ranking is same across all the consumers, and it is well known. And we also analyze the market structure beyond the duopoly. So we try to extend our results to inform cases, and both papers do find a similar result, that loss in product dimension, loss of aversion in product dimension leads to softening of competition. It relaxes competition. So let us consider the benchmark case of monopoly. There's a monopolist who is producing a low quality product S1, and its objective is to choose prices such that profits are maximized. And we assume that there is a constant marginal cost, and we assume for simplicity that it is zero, and there is no reference product by definition. Our consumers are very diverse in terms of their taste for quality. Which is measured by theta. Theta is their preference parameter, and it is, the larger the theta, it means the more sensitive the consumer is towards the quality changes. The theta is assumed to be uniformly distributed between theta lower bar and theta upper bar, and each consumer buys at most one unit of the product. So the utility of the consumer type theta, who is buying one unit of the product, if he buys the product, is given by this equation at the bottom. So if he buys the product, then he gets the utility of V plus theta S1 minus the price he pays. If he doesn't buy the product, it's zero. So I'm not describing the equilibrium over here. We will just use that in comparison with the duopoly results. So let us see the duopoly duopoly case with full market coverage. By full market coverage, we mean that every consumer, so between theta lower bar to theta upper bar, every consumer is catered by one of the firms at least. So two firms. There are two firms competing in vertically differentiated goods. There are two firms competing in the market with vertically differentiated goods. One of them produces a high quality product S2, and the second one produces a lower quality product S1. And these qualities are exogenously given. And for simplicity, we have assumed the constant marginal cost to be zero. So the objective of firm over here is to choose prices simultaneously so that their profits are maximized. And for simplicity, we have normalized this V over here to be zero for further analysis. So, so if the consumer of type theta consumes a high quality product, then there is no product to compare with. There's product to compare with, but he's consuming the best product, so he does not feel a sense of loss. So his utility is precisely the same. So theta S2 is the utility that he derives by consuming the high quality product 2, and the P2 is the price that he pays. But when the consumer of type theta consumes the low quality product, then he feels a sense of loss, that there was a better quality product in the market that I am losing on, and that takes away from the utility. So that term is captured by over here, the last term in this equation, the second equation. So theta S1 is the utility that he derives from consuming the lower quality product, and P1 is the price. And the lambda it tries to capture the strength of reference dependence. S2 minus S1 is nothing but the quality differential between the two products, which gives the loss. And if I'm more sensitive to the quality changes, then I experience a larger loss for the same quality level. So given this utility specifications, we try to find out what is the demand for firm 1 and firm 2. For that, we try to find out who is the indifferent consumer between the firm 1 and who is indifferent between buying from firm 1 and firm 2. So theta hat gives the consumer who is indifferent between buying from firm 1 and firm 2. So anybody to the left of theta hat will buy from lower quality firm 1, and anybody to the right of theta hat will buy from the higher quality firm 2. So this is the demand for both the firms. As we can see that increase in the reference dependence parameter lambda makes the demand less price sensitive. So this is something that is important to us because it will drive our results. So that will become clear in the next slide. So these are the profit specification and these are the reaction functions. As you can see that as each firm, the prices are strategic complements over here. As each firm raises its price, each firm will raise its price when other does, because the loss in the profit because of the reduction in demand is compensated by the rise in the prices. So we also, now the next thing that we try to see, what happens when lambda goes up. So that is, the consumers become more and more reference dependent. So these are the reaction functions of firm 2 and firm 1. As reference dependence parameter goes up, consumers become more reference dependent. The reaction function of the high quality firm 2 goes up, and so does the firm 1, and the new prices are given by the new intersection point over here. So as you can see, the prices for both the firms has increased, but the increase in the price charged by firm 2 is which is high quality firm, is higher than the firm 1. So it is quite intuitive that firm 2 will charge higher prices if consumers are more reference dependent. But what is not immediately clear is why firm 1 will charge higher prices when consumers are becoming more reference dependent. So I've explained the intuition behind it. So as there's high loss due to reference dependence, there's less utility from the lower quality product in the presence of the high quality product. So this secures the high demand for good 2, that is high quality product, which helps the firm 2 to charge a higher price, and firm 1 responds positively to price charged by firm 2 because prices are strategic complements. As we have seen, the reaction functions were positively sloped. So in the next question that we ask, if duopoly profit can equal monopoly profits, the answer is no, because in this case the market is fully covered. So each firms the fact that firms have to cater to the consumers with lowest theta that puts a restriction on the price increase by the firm, and which in turn puts a restriction on the profit level of the firm. So it is not possible for duopolists to earn profits more than monopoly level profits. So then we ask a question: if we allow for partial market coverage, that is, the firms need not worry about losing some consumers, can we get the same results? So we allow for partial market coverage. Partial market coverage is nothing, it's very simple. Everything is exactly same. It's just that we allow the consumers an option not to buy product if it is not feasible for them. So so there will be two indifferent consumer. The first one is given by theta 1 hat, which is the consumer who is indifferent between buying good one and not buying good. Consumer is given by theta 2 hat. This consumer is indifferent between buying good one and buying good 2. So the last diagram over here, this clearly specifies the demand for firm 1 and the demand for firm 2, and the section of the consumer who do not buy any product at all. So given this demand structure, we try to again calculate equilibrium prices and profits, and then we try to see if duopoly profits can equal monopoly profit, and we find the answer: yes, it is possible for some firms to attain the monopoly level profit even when they are in duopoly. And the intuition behind is very simple, that firms do not care if some consumers are left out of the market, so they can increase the price accordingly to determine their profit levels. So we add to the literature and provide insights about when incumbents are not uncomfortable about inviting entrants. So this sums up my first chapter pretty much. And but there's one more thing that we do, that we try to extend this to see if we can have this result in more than one firm case, more than two firms. And what we see that that duopoly is the unique oligopolistic structure which allows firms to have monopoly level of profits, because if we have more than two firms, then market becomes too segmented, and that does not allow any firm, any of the firms, even the highest quality firm, to achieve monopoly level profits. So this sums up my first chapter. Now let us go to the second chapter, that is fairness is flexible. And so in this chapter, we examine that different proportions are deemed fair across different contexts. So we will go by one example that will, firstly, I'll go through an example that will explain the idea briefly about what I'm doing in this chapter. Suppose there are twins and they have an exam to take. Both of them are preparing for it. One of them is hardworking and the other one does not want to work that hard. He just wants to pass the exams. Next day, they go ahead and take up the exam. The hardworking students get 90% and the hardly working one gets 60%. So over here, there's a sense of fairness that links rewards to effort. The student who worked harder got the higher scores. So now they go home and they share the news with the parents that both of them have passed. The parents get delighted and they give them a bar of chocolate to share, but they insist that they should share it equally. There's another notion of fairness over here that is involved, that links to egalitarian idea, that that individual differences, personal differences, in this case the test aptitude, should not matter over here in enjoying the greater things like celebrations. So this is very similar to the idea how we perceive the idea of fairness in the distribution of justice, that justice should be equal for all irrespective of the individual differences, gender or race or anything. So in this example, I have explained two ideas of fairness. One, the one that links rewards to effort. The second one that overlooks the personal differences. So we see that there is the multiplicity of fairness ideal present here, and we want to know, this is something that motivated our research problem, that we want to know which fairness ideal prevail in the reality. And so we try to answer this question in a particular setup of unstructured bargaining, and we try to analyze the three fairness ideals. I'll explain these ideals in a moment, given in a beautiful book by Mula called Fair Division and Collective Welfare. And we make the subjects bargain, and then we try to empirically disentangle different notion of fairness from the data. So these are the three notions. I will explain these notions using an example that will be easier. So suppose there are two agents, agent Y and agent X. Agent Y can individually earn 100 rupees on his own, and agent X can earn individually 50 rupees on his own. Now, so they come together and they earn a greater pie size of 300, which is way more than what their some of their individual earnings are. Now the question is, how do they negotiate, or how do they distribute the pie? So the uniform gain solution proposed in the book by Mula says that the agent should not, the individual differences between the agents should not matter, and the pie size generated should be divided equally. This links to the egalitarian idea. So agent Y should get 150 and agent X should get 150. Then the proportional gain says that you should care about the individual difference between the agents, and their efficiency, the pie size should be distributed in terms of their efficiency, which is denoted by their individual earnings over here. So they should distribute the pie size in 2:1 ratio. So agent Y gets 200 and agent X gets 100. The third one is equal surplus, which is Nash type. So the basic idea behind the third idea is that whatever the gain is from the corporation, so when the two person come together, they have a gain from the corporation. That gain should be divided equally. So agent Y should get 100 plus 75, that is 175, and agent X should get 50 plus 75, which is 125. So I would request the audience to think about, if this is the situation, what would our negotiator choose? And I promise that by the end of the chapter, I will show you what our subjects do. So let me go through experiment description of experiment. So our subjects are students from graduate students, and we randomly allocate them into 4 treatment groups. In each group, each participant take up with the test, and the test comprises of 20 difficult questions, mostly from mathematics and probability. And then we take their test and we grade them, and then we divide them into top half and bottom half based on their ranks. So we evaluate the test and then we divide them. So each high rank agent in the top half gets paired with a low rank agent in the bottom half. And then we ask them to bargain over online chat conversation to split a sum of rupees 100, 300, 600 or 900, depending upon which treatment they are. So across the treatment, there's only one thing that varies, that is the pie size that they negotiate over. But before the chat conversation begins, we do inform them that the disagreement payoff, in case they disagree, the disagreement payoff for the high rank individual is 100, and the disagreement payoff for the low rank individual is 50. And this is known to both of them. So there are further rules of negotiation to preserve anonymity while the conversation goes on, the bargaining goes on. So we ask them not to disclose their identity under any circumstances during the chat. They must converse in English, and they were free to use emoticons, and they did use. They must explicitly agree or disagree within 10 minutes. If they fail to do so, then we counted that as disagreement. So then we generate our data, and this is the scatter plot of our data. And this slide sums up the entire paper, main results of entire paper. So over here, the 4 negative 45-degree lines represents the 4 treatment over here, and the dotted lines represent the theoretical solution given by proportional gains PRO, equal surplus ES, and uniform gains UG. And the tiny square boxes that you can see are the scatter plot, is our data. So as you can see, as our pie size grows from 180 to 300 to 600 to 900, there is a gravitation of the data towards UG solution away from PRO. And that primarily is driven by the fact that PRO is one of the most popular choices when the pie size is closer to the sum of the disagreement payoff. And as the pie size grows larger and larger away from the sum of the disagreement payoff, uniform gain is something that becomes really popular. And so let us see the summary of the treatments. I'm not going into detail of this slide in particular, but I want to point out one thing, that is the mean share of the high ranked individual. So as you can see in the treatment 180, the mean share of the high ranked individual is 0.64, which is quite close to the proportional rule solution 2/3. And this keeps on, this mean share, the average share that a high ranked individual gets, keep on declining as pie size increases. And for the pie size of the 900, the mean share is 0.52. So it keeps declining as the pie size grows larger and larger. So we see why this is happening. So is it the case that, so how many people fix exactly PRO solution in the different treatment? Is PRO solution equally popular in all the treatments or not? So, and I mean exactly means exactly to 2:1 ratio. So we see that as the pie size grows, the popularity of the PRO solution decreases. PRO is chosen by is mostly chosen by the people, by the bargainers in treatment 180, and the people in the subjects in the treatment 900 do not prefer to choose PRO solution as much as the treatments with lower pie size. So the next question is, the next thing we see that the UG solution, the proportion of people who picks UG solution uh, in uh, in the bargaining setup, and we see that its popularity increases as the pie size increases. Over here you can see the maximum is at 900 and 600. So higher the pie size, more people are choosing exact UG solutions. So now we also look at ES. ES doesn't seem to be popular choice at all, but it is quite a stable choice across all the treatment. And to sum up all these three fairness ideals that we have just seen, we also come up with our own allocation rule, which is given by this equation over here in the second line, which says in what proportion the y and x should distribute the pie size. Small s over here represents the, small s over here represents the surplus over disagreement payoff, and dy and dx are nothing but their disagreement payoffs, and a is a constant. What I would like to point out over here is that if a is equal to 2, then if a is equal to 2, then this represents equal surplus. This is nothing but the same to equal surplus. When a is infinity, then this represents PRO solution. As you can see, y by x is nothing but dy by dx. So this represents PRO solution, that is proportional gains. When a is 0, this is nothing but 1. So it represents UG solutions. So this allocation rules encompasses all the rules that we have discussed so far. So
can I ask one question?
yes, please.
So these disagreement payoffs, 150, right?
150.
They were exogenously decided as part of the experiment, or could
Yes.
people? Okay.
Yeah, it was exactly.
Do you have any comments about that? As I mean, if people were to bargain about that as well, like if you think of the bargaining as a two-step procedure, first they have threats that individually, the disagreement payoffs often in a bargaining situation are actually endogenously decided. I mean, could you envisage such a situation in this context?
So there are papers who look at the role of the disagreement payoffs and how do they affect the bargaining outcomes. In this particular paper, we were interested in the effect of the stake size involved. And what we see is that in the literature, there are papers who look at the disagreement payoffs and decide they decide about how it affects the bargaining outcomes. But in particular, we are not interested in that because that is something that has already been done in the literature. So we focus on the stake size involved and see that.
Okay.
So we see in this allocation particular rule that we see, we try to see that we see the basic idea behind this allocation rule is that the disagreement payoffs role becomes lower and lower as the pie size increases. So for higher pie size, the role of disagreement payoff is almost not there, and that is what the basic idea behind this result is. So we try to see the observed data against the fairness rules. So first column over here represents the treatments. N over here represents the number of bargaining pairs involved and in each treatment, and mean is given in the third column, the observed mean, and the fourth column represents the 95% confidence interval around it. And we can see that 95% confidence interval clearly rejects the PRO solution and UG solution. It is the ES solution that best explains the data. Though, so what we had seen so far is that it was the PRO and UG solution that were the most popular choice, but it is the ES solution that better explains the data. So, our allocation rule is something that best explains the data. So it seems that the strength of focal point matters, but the relevance matters more. And agent do resort to focal points, but account for the relevance at the same time. So, and the role of the disagreement payoffs becomes very irrelevant when the pie size increases. So this can be explained in an example very easily. Suppose that we were earning 150 as disagreement payoffs, and now we come together and earn 153. Then individual differences would matter. But suppose we were earning rupees 2 and 1 on our own, and then we earn 10 lakh rupees together. So then in that case, I expect the individual differences would not matter. And that's what we observe in this experiment. So it seems that subjects mostly weigh their relative gains against their individual disagreement payoff when they negotiate. So let us come to the third chapter. The third chapter is happiness in the finite. In this chapter, we try to argue, we try to look at the traditional economics idea that competition maximizes welfare. So competition means large number of buyers and large number of sellers. Large number of sellers in turns mean there are a large number of products, and there's a cognition cost from the evaluation of each product and comparing them. So while many argue that these choices can be liberating, but the psychologists find them to be paralyzing. So we see that there's a finite number of firms where the marginal benefit from the choices matches the marginal cost of cognition, thereby mimicking an oligopolistic structure. The main result is that even when these costs of cognition is bounded at very low levels, our results actually go through. So we don't need the cost to be really high. Even if it is bounded at low levels, we see that oligopolistic structure maximizes the welfare. There are primarily two sources of these cognitive costs. One is biological, and the second one is psychological. The biological cost comes mostly from the processing of information, and they say that comparisons can be mentally taxing. So even when the choices are binary, then also it can be taxing, let alone when we have n number of choices. Suppose there is a diabetic person who has just two choices. There is a cake lying in front of him and he has two choices whether to eat that or not. So we have two parts. We have three parts in our brain. The one that I'm talking about are amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Amygdala is the most instinctive, but the oldest part of our brain, and it is very instinctive. So it says that, hey, that cake is very tasty. It will give me a lot of happiness. Just eat it. And the second part that I'm talking about of our brain is prefrontal cortex. It is responsible for all the reasonings and logic, etc. So the prefrontal cortex argues that no, this is you are diabetic. You are not supposed to take sugar, and it is not good for your long-term health. So there's a tussle going on between the two, and it leaves the person mentally exhausted. And even if the amygdala wins and the person eats the cake, then also the after the cake has been finished, the prefrontal cortex keep nagging the person that, hey, you have eaten this, there will be consequences, and they are coming. This overall this overall thing takes away from the utility that we derive out of the consumption. So processing of information can be taxing. The psychological cost relates to evaluation and comparisons. So if Mulainathan and Shafir, they say that we have limited mental bandwidth. I'm not focusing much on this, but I would like to talk few things about paradox of choice by Barry Schwartz. He says that suppose you go to a store that offers just 4 pair of jeans. You evaluate them and you buy 1 pair of jeans, and you find that it is not very comfortable, and then you say that, okay, hey, the store was having just 4 options, I picked the best, the it's the problem of the shop that they did not offer me a lot of choices. But now suppose that they have a lot of choices and you pick one and you did not like one. Now you put your blame on yourself that there were many choices, I might have picked the bad choice. And also the fact that there were many choices, we have an upward revision of expectation that there might have been a better product. The better product must have been better than what I have picked. So these choices do impose a cost from biological and psychological source. So what we try to do over here is that we firstly model consumers, but we try to firstly establish the traditional economics result that welfare is maximized with competition, and then we try to introduce cognitive cost, and then we see if the result remains the same or not. And so let us go through the model. So there are key identical utility maximizing consumers, and there are n identical profit maximizing firm who engage in no competition. Now, so the consumer problem is given by this utility specification, and the budget constraint is this. P is the price of commodity X, and Y is Y represents all the commodities with numeric price, and M is the total income. So we have taken a quadratic specification of the utility because it approximates other well-behaved utility specification, and it also gives us linear demand function, which is very easier, which makes our life a little more simple. So this is the demand curve given for a representative consumer, and the market demand curve is given by this, which is nothing but K times the X star, because they are K identical consumers, and this gives us the inverse demand function. And the reason that we are analyzing Kuno competition over here is that it helps us to analyze both extremes, both monopoly and competition. So market clearing condition requires the market demand to be equal to market supply. Market supply is given by capital Q, which is nothing but sum of the supplies by all the firms. And this is the profit function, and then we optimize it and we get the prices, profits, quantities, etc. And then we calculate the surplus. Surplus is nothing but consumer welfare plus producers welfare. And then we see that as n increases, the firm the total surplus increases. So more firms are better. We have established the traditional result that competition maximizes welfare. Now what we do is that we introduce cognitive cost function in the utility specification. So we have just added one more this term of that captures the cognition cost. So this is just for illustrative purpose. We have also taken a look at other cost structures. So this cost structure comes from the fact that so if there are n products, and then the number of ways in which we can make pairwise comparisons of the end products. So that is given by n into n minus 1 by 2. And so why the question again is why do we look at homogeneous products? So you get to know about the product are homogeneous only if you compare them, and the similar the products are, it is more difficult to make choices. For example, choosing between Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma for an IPL match is more difficult than choosing between Virat Kohli and a batsman that is not so good. So so the total welfare is again the sum of producer surplus and consumer surplus, and we see that when there is one firm, then the welfare is positive, and as n grows to infinity, the welfare kinds of decline to minus infinity. So there is a finite number of n that maximizes the welfare. And so for given any cognition cost, cognition measure of cognition cost mu, we can find the exact number of the firms which maximizes the welfare for given set of parameters. So as we can see in this graph, as the measure of the cognition cost goes higher and higher, the welfare maximizing number of firms keeps on declining. And in this figure, you can see for when then when mu is 0.2, the welfare maximizing number of firm is 3. When mu decreases, the welfare maximizing number of firm increases. So in the 2D panel, we can see that when mu is 0.02, the welfare maximizing number of firm is 6. So one can argue that, okay, you have looked at a particular cost structure, but we have looked at many cost structures. For example, we have looked at n and n log n. N log n is the cost structure that represents the most efficient way, the complexity involved in sorting n things in the most efficient manner. And we also we have also calculated a critical cost function, which is given by G star over here. And this line, the bottom line is the cost function. The bottom curve is the cost function G star. And the dotted one is the one that NC2 represents, the cost function which is represented by NC2. And the dark black line is n log n. And what we found that this G star is bounded and increasing and bounded at a very low level. And for any cost function which is greater than this, our results go through that the oligopolistic structure maximizes the welfare. So in the presence of cognition cost, welfare is maximized when the market is oligopolistic. We are trying to model this to heterogeneous product case because the result may weaken if there is love for variety. But as Minsky has argued, that the consumers who love for variety will eventually succumb to the cognitive cost. So this pretty much sums up the 3 chapters. I just remembered in relation to Siddharth's question, the RIFA solution have variant where disagreement points evolve with the process of negotiation. And Nick Feltovich has an experiment that has this result about how disagreement points matter. So thank you. I would like to thank my family, and of course that includes everyone from my side, for everything and being always there for me. Thank you.
Okay, so now we will move to our external Professor Sinha.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So have you seen the reports written by the 2 external examiner? Because I'm supposed to start from here.
Yes, I have.
Okay. So do you have defenses for those, some of the points they have raised, the 2 examiners?
Yeah, I have. The first point was regarding the switching cost, and how different is my literature to switching cost and product differentiation. So product differentiation I have addressed. If the product differentiation between the 2 products is low, then there won't be any reference. The impact of reference dependence will be very low, and then we will not have the similar implications as we have, because we need a minimum level of product heterogeneity in the model. And switching cost has so if the consumers, the switching costs have to be switching cost. In case of switching cost, the consumers have in the first period, there are 2 periods involved in general, and if the consumers inherit their choices from the first period to second period, then the firms actually charges higher prices in the second period and in the first period as well. They give discount, but it is greater than what they would charge in absence of switching cost. But if consumers do not inherit their choices from their preferences from the first period, then the firms charges gives a discount in the both periods, and in the second period they charge the price which is exactly similar to the switching prices, which is exactly similar in absence what firm would have charged in absence of switching cost. So what we see is that switching cost can intensify or soften the price competition depending upon the consumer details. In our case, the reference dependence softens the price competition, and there will be an implications on welfare which will be mixed for the switching cost depending upon the cost structure. In our case, the welfare results for the consumers are like the consumers are completely exploited by the firms, and consumers are completely exploited by the firms. So they takes away all the surplus, try to take away from all the surplus. So that's what the difference between the switching cost and my paper is. And the second question was, what is the distinction between welfare and happiness? In the third chapter, there is no distinction between the welfare and the happiness in the third chapter. And there was another question about, is welfare for the firm and consumer weighted differently, especially when making assertion about antitrust and competition policy? So in the case of the third chapter, the consumers are identical. We do not weigh them differently. And there's another question about what happens to your result when a fraction of consumers are not behavioral. This will need some time because this will involve a little more calculations, and I'm on it, but I have not been able to solve it completely. So this will need some time. I haven't done this. So, and there's another question, did you conduct pilot experiments before the final experiment? The answer is yes. And we have included the results in appendix of the chapter. In fact, we use the pilot results to calculate, to finalize the sample size. And we also use the pilot results to determine the time of negotiation that we should give the participants. And there are 2 more questions about ethics approval, and that we will include in the paper. And there's one more question. The consumer in this case is necessarily a single individual, not a firm or group of individuals for whom behavioral concerns are less important. I think